Hi there and welcome back. Now, in many of the videos I've recorded in this series, I've referred to using tracks. They are used in professional theatre more and more nowadays, whether it be to augment the singing, company singing, or to add to the orchestration. But these days, more and more licensing companies are making available a huge amount of fully pre-recorded tracks that companies and groups can hire, which fully replaces live musicians. Does this benefit our musical theatre community, or is it something to threaten live music? Should we be using such tracks in musical theatre at all? The first time I used any form of pre-recorded track was in the early 90s. Yes, I'm that old. And I was MD of a production of Chicago, which, as I remember, then included 2 pianos. Now, the band was located on the stage and therefore physically wasn't enough room for 2 pianos. So I pre-recorded or sequenced the second piano using an early type of sequencer and triggered the sequencer at certain points during the performance, and the band played along. All worked incredibly well. Now, 30 years on from then, we have software and systems that can not only add to the live musicians we have in our band and orchestras, but many musical productions are now available with fully pre-recorded accompaniments that saves having any live musicians at all. Earlier this year, I was working on a production that was orchestrated in such a way that 2 brass players were only needed to play for, say, less than 50% of the entire score. Not an ideal use of players or the cost of having those players present. As some of the musical numbers had supplied tracks to be used to supplement the orchestration, I decided to pre-record those parts rather than pay musicians to sit there and play, well, only half of what the rest of the band were playing. Despite me using tracks on occasions, I am not for 1 minute advocating that everything should be pre-recorded. There is nothing like the sound of live music, and even if you can't see the band in some auditoria, knowing that the players are there plying their trade gives an audience member like me a sense of I'm experiencing something special, something live, and everything that brings. Then, a couple of months ago, I received a telephone call that changed the way I think about music in our productions. A close friend of mine had been banging on about a production of Sondheim's Sweeney Todd, the Demon Barber of Fleet Street for months. He was involved in this production, and on this particular Sunday morning, it was he that I found on the end of the phone. A company belonging to a local theatre had been brought together specifically to do this production. The company was made up of singers who had a particular interest in Sondheim's music and had been rehearsing for up to 4 times a week for the past 3 months, when, and suddenly, their music director resigned with less than 3 weeks before their first performance. After all the work and dedication they had committed to this production, they were clearly devastated. The question I was asked was, would I consider taking on this production as musical director and lead the 9-piece orchestra they had hired and play the keys part in the orchestration? Now, I'm not a fan of Sondheim, and I've avoided such weeks previously. It's just a personal opinion, but I just feel the music is more complicated than it needs to be, and more difficult to play than it needs to be. Well, it's just not my thing. So my answer was a firm no. We then spent some time discussing all the musicians we knew of in the area that would take on this production as MD and could play it with less than 3 weeks to rehearse. We couldn't think of anyone. Now, I was aware that there was a pre-recorded orchestral accompaniment available for this production through the licensor MTI, and directed my friend towards their website, which I knew had some samples of the recordings. If the company would consider using this method, then maybe I could help, and maybe their rehearsals to date would not be in vain. The following morning I received a call to say, yes, we're on, and could I come and meet the artistic director, the production director and producer, and explain how I felt it could work. In that meeting I explained that there was no way I could confidently play this part in less than 3 weeks, and that my aim would be to marry what had already been learnt by the company with the pre-recorded accompaniment these tracks would provide. The following evening I met the company, and to avoid any negative feelings I might have encountered to those that felt they were going to be singing to some sort of karaoke machine, I explained how it would work and what my aim was. I explained that some tempos may be different to how they had rehearsed to date, but I would conduct the production and they would be able to view me on a monitor at the rear of the auditorium. With now less than 2 weeks before the opening night, I took my first rehearsal with the now supplied full set of tracks. The entire company, without exception, were overwhelmed by the quality of the sound that they were now singing to. They all felt a tangible uplift and a new authenticity to their performances that such a full accompaniment brought. Such was the quality of the recording, the local newspaper reported after the first performance that, and I quote, "The orchestra played to perfection throughout the difficult score," unquote. The company later had to correct that. Now, the important note to take from this story is that this theatre company, would normally only do plays. They had not done a musical for 11 years. And when I asked the artistic director why this was the case, I was told that they simply don't have the space or the funds to hire a band or orchestra. They had waited this long to, and I quote, be able to afford to do a musical. But now that they are aware of what can be achieved through such tracks being made available, they will be able to produce musicals more often. Despite my initial thoughts that such tracks, see what I did there? Despite the thoughts that such tracks would do a disservice to musicians, these tracks are giving groups that couldn't otherwise afford a band or an orchestra, or those that physically don't have the room, the opportunity to perform musicals. That can only be a good thing, surely. If you think otherwise, I'd love to hear your comments, positive or negative. Let me know in the comments box below. See you next time.